Cool. And we're live, Ari.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Ari Zohadi, and I am an account executive here at Mooven. Welcome to our third installment of our four-part webinar series. Today, we'll be focusing on how to unleash project efficiency for paving and road maintenance jobs with Mooven. Oftentimes, we see that the integration of technology into paving and maintenance works is frequently neglected. The high volumes of small works usually don't naturally align with the intense focus capital improvements get. Today, Mooven's founder and CEO, Misha Gabriels, along with myself, will dive into how you can utilize Mooven and our AI predictions to help influence real-time decision-making and change the way you work. So without further ado, Misha, I'll pass it on over to you to take us through the process.
Cool. Thanks, Ari, and welcome, everyone. I think, Ari, in particular, we should get you to jump back in when we're talking about some of those kind of business hours, public transit components. Me and you have been doing a lot of work around that space, and like a really interesting way for us to be able to help people doing high volumes of work. So as Ari mentioned, this particular webinar is all around people who are doing either, say, paving work. So, this can be sometimes very large jobs, but still jobs which are very quickly coming into an area and then exiting out of an area or moving very quickly through different areas, as well as maintenance activity. So this can be anything from potholing, minor repairs, striping or line marking, and all of the kind of smaller tasks, ITS maintenance tasks, which need to occur within a city and within a transport network. What the next two webinars after that are coming up are the looking at complaints and how we actually change this perspective on complaints and turn that into a positive. And then we're going to do a follow-on one around more of the uses of AI within Mooven. So we had a few questions come up on this and people were really interested. So we thought it was a great opportunity to share some of the work which we're doing and look to bring a few additional people in for that session. So cutting to like the challenges of the kind of maintenance and paving space. And look, this is one I really like because it really lets you shine as a technology business. So, when we're talking about some of these bigger projects, like we've done in a previous webinar, so, major capital works or even kind of minor capital works, there's a lot more people involved. You get to kind of have a lot more discussion about what's going on. There's a lot more resource available to like focus on an individual job. And then you've also got the time to see what happens. So if you're sitting in a location for months or potentially years, you get this amazing feedback coming back. And so you can understand what's going on. You can take learnings from 1 month and apply them to the next month. Now, if you're starting to work in a location where you're only going to be there for 2 hours or 4 hours, or maybe a couple of days, and you're doing that for hundreds, if not thousands of jobs in a week or a month, that starts to become completely different. It's quite a different challenge which people are dealing with. And so the really key components to this is just the sheer volume of work which is underway. So for a lot of teams we're dealing with, you're talking about 1,000+ jobs a week which are occurring. And so, the way we've approached this would be like pretty much completely impractical to put the man hours involved in thinking, deciding, informing that decision making in a traditional sense. So it just doesn't stack up. You just can't put that effort in. But then also, your ability to plan is really compromised. So while at a macro level, you've got a good sense of the type of activity you need to do. So if you're doing vegetation management and grass mowing, there's some good trends which are sitting there. But so much about the work which occurs needs to be really dynamic, and it's often quite unpredictable and it changes. And so that's, the constant demand on the work itself to be responsive to like where minor issues have occurred and potholing, but also looking at that third point, like, accidents, weather, unforeseen events. And these things just come in, they're clearly unpredictable, and they don't just kind of affect the moment, but they really turn any of those best laid plans into a complete, rewrite of what you're looking at and how you're processing that. So you've got, this really high volume of frequent work. You've got a lot of change which is occurring within that. But I think when you think about trying to work smarter, like one of the things which becomes even more challenging when you're talking about the paving and maintenance aspect is if you have that real lack of evidence-based feedback coming back to you, it's really, really hard to know, if you do make a change to what you're working on, has that been better or has it not? Like, what's working, what isn't? Like, where are those issues or not? And so again, if you're only in a location for a couple of hours or maybe a day, how do you understand if that was working well, or how don't you? And this is the stuff which we see, the traditional kind of human hours way of looking at solving the problem, you just really can't get into the level of detail and sophistication which you'd ideally like to in this space. And it's one which we just get super excited about how we can leverage what we can do at scale to support these really small jobs. And the impact can be huge. So even on something simple, like a really common example is loop cutting. So you have to repair some loops underneath some signals. That approach would often, for a lot of the markets we're sitting in, will often end up occurring over 2 nights because there's a concern about the impact and needing to start later. So while they're small little jobs, again, tailoring what you're doing might be able to cut that job from a 2-night job down to a single night job. And so it can have this really awesome disproportionate impact. So what we're going to cover in this session is like 2 really, really important components. If you're trying to think about doing this high volume work where there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of dynamic change, like how can we do that in a better way? So one's going to be, how do you gain the visibility of what's going on within the area you're operating in so you make better decisions? And that's really, if you can gain that visibility, overlay your specific context, you get to this point which you can adapt and you can really start to learn and drive new changes with that. And then the second part of this webinar is going to have a look at actually how do we enable that operational intelligence. So even within that ability to adapt, it's just impossible to understand what's going to happen this afternoon, let alone what's going to happen next week. So how do you enable anyone who's involved in that delivery to have really, really clear visibility about what's going on right now so they can handle those unpredictable environments and they can do the best with them. So all around, how do you gain visibility for high volume work? So we're going to cover 3 concepts here, and then I'm going to jump to show you something within Mooven as well about how you can do this for the small jobs. So the first one is like, how do we understand what's occurring in the first place? And so again, really awesome space where technology can support here. So what we typically look at is going, how do we get this really rich visibility over your entire area which you're operating in? And that can comprise of a whole range of different inputs. So for us, really typically you're looking at, okay, how do we get all of the traffic patterns? So we understand everywhere where congestion is occurring and when it's not, how the different areas relate to each other and how that changes over months and throughout the year. But then with that, you can overlay, great, can we get the signals data? So can we get this really rich volume data so we understand the difference between volume and traffic impacts of the road? Can we understand things like weather and other components? Now, if you build all of that up, what you can do in a common way, this is kind of discussed and framed, is to go, how can we get a heat map of what's typical? And I think this is the really cool way of approaching this is you take all of this complexity and all of this activity which is going on, and then you just distill that down into something which is really, really simple. So if you've got a team who's doing inspections, for example, and they're going out on the network, we can take all of this kind of visibility and distill it down to the simple view of depending on where you are in the network, when is that network busy and what's the best way you could go about organizing the work. So it takes this kind of advanced dynamic information and puts it into a really simple context for someone who's making a trade-off about how they might approach their day-to-day job. So that's a great starting point, and there's a lot of value in that alone. But what gets really, really interesting is if you could overlay some additional context. And so one of the really important pieces of context which we often find with this is, can we actually tell what happens when teams are on the road and doing the work? So obviously one of the things which often comes through is there can be concern about, look, you can't do grass mowing at this time, you can't do potholing at this time, we don't want you to work in the interpeak because we're really concerned about the traffic and the impact of traffic. So you've got to work in the early mornings or overnight or other periods of time. Now, most of that is based on some really kind of clear thinking about volume and what's going on, but it's again not measuring the actual outcome and the fact. So like there's good assumptions made for really good reasons, but it's not necessarily linked to the actual behavior. So one of the things which we've been doing is taking all of that work and then overlaying that work onto what the conditions were in that exact location at that time. And what's really, really fascinating with this is you see stuff and you can spot what's going on. So these graphs on the right-hand side, they're a little bit technical, but hopefully not too bad to explain. So what you're looking at here is 3 sections of road. What we've done is we've tagged all of those little jobs which are occurring back to that section of road. So this happened retrospectively. So there's just a big list of, the jobs which were done in the month, and we could tag that back to that. But what we were looking for here was when they were working, was it causing an issue? Because that's such a critical part of the conversation. And so all of the blue dots here represent kind of instances of recorded traffic behavior when no one was working. So the blue dots are like no one was working. So you can see in this top example, there's an afternoon peak and there's a little bit of a morning peak going on. So the traffic slows down a bit. But there's not a lot going on through the middle of the day. Now, we can then overlay the orange dots. Now, the orange dots represent when work occurred. And so there's a traditional thinking that if you worked in the interpeak, it was going to cause an issue. But this just helps us cut right through those assumptions and measure what actually happens in this case. And so in this case, we can see the orange dots. So that's work occurring in the interpeak between the morning and AM peak. And they're less likely or just as equally as likely to have that maybe a slight delay in traffic there, but they're not sitting way above that blue line. Now, if they were sitting way above, you could really easily identify that this work has caused additional traffic congestion. But this just shows us that it hasn't caused anything different. Like being there when the teams are doing this particular work didn't actually cause more of an impact. Even if the traffic was slightly slower during the day, it would have been slightly slower regardless of the people being there. So it's like this really poignant, interesting piece of insight. But again, we're talking about hundreds if not thousands of jobs. So how do we scale that up? And so this is where it gets even more interesting again. So then you take that real good visibility, you overlay all the work which you're doing, but then you aggregate all of that up. So then you can look over an extended period of time and go, all the different types of work which we're doing, how disruptive are they? And so how to read this visual here is you go, the average kind of percentage of time there were delays when there was no work occurring is, what is this, say 35%, 40% of the time, something like that are occurring. So anything which is above this means that there's more likely to have a delay when that work was occurring than when nothing was occurring. And then anything below that means that it was less likely that there's a delay occurring. And so this just immediately helps the team to think about all the different types of activity which is going on and how that relates to impacts on the road network. Now, with this context, you can start to have a think about how you might change what you're doing. So in this example here, hand sweeping was quite disruptive. Mechanical sweeping wasn't. Now, you need to know the specifics of the contract and what they're working on. Are they working in the same areas? Is it in the same setup? But it gives you this insight. It gives the team the ability to spot trends, to spot situations or types of activity which are resulting in an impact. And then they have the ability to change their practices and have a look at those changing practices and then come back and measure it the month after and the month after again. And so it's a really powerful way to drive change and to be able to spot, ROI benefits from that. So all of that kind of comes through and gives you this kind of macro picture about what's going on. One of the ones I just wanted to take you through is a kind of more micro view of this. So if you were doing a particular job and you needed to find some information quickly, so this is where I was going to jump into Mooven and just show you a way which we can help to support with this. So on a bigger project, there's often teams who go out, they go knocking on business doors or walking around the local neighborhood to understand what businesses are open. You try to gather information on what type of public transit routes come through there. But that's often a process which takes, weeks, if not longer, to compile. And so, if you're dealing with this like frequent work, you're just not going to do it. Because by the time you've done that, the scheduling has changed a little bit and it's just not relevant anymore, or it's just taken too long. So one of the really powerful things which we've been working on in Mooven, if I just switch over to this, yep, perfect, you guys can see that, is this idea of being able to really, really quickly, within a couple of minutes, get an understanding of a location to help you inform your thinking. So this can be really early in the process, or it can be much, much later. So I'm just going to go maintenance example. And I'm going to go here. So the little image which you saw up on the screen before was this little location here. So I'm just going to take you through the process of if someone wanted to do this, to understand a location and how it worked, how simple it is for someone to be able to go through there. So we just enter in the location which we want to go to. If we want, we can specify the dates about when this work's going to occur. So I'm going to say that we're going to plan to work between 14 January and 18 January. So we set that up. That's nice and easy. We then go to the next stage. So we go, okay, what's that work area which we're going to be working in? So I'm going to define the work area here. And so in this example, we can say that maybe they're doing some work on the signals, so some loop cutting and maybe some minor patch repair. So we're just going to say we're affecting this particular intersection here. So I'm going to define that as my work area. So we've captured that now. We understand what that work area is. So I'm going to save that. And then what we get off the back of this is we can go and define the area which we're concerned about. So what is the area which we think may get disrupted by the work which we're doing? Now, if we zoom in here a little bit and we know the area, there's actually more shops which run up and down the street here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this area here and just expand it further down to the south. And I'm also going to expand this area here further to the north. So we want to capture anything which is active within those zones. We can define that straight away. And then what it's going to do is send us a pack. So I'm going to go, yep, I want you to send me that pack. I'll jump back in later in the webinar and show you what that pack looks like in live so you can see how that's come through. But what that is going to show us, as you see here, is you're going to get a view of business hours. So how many businesses in that location, how many of them open, and how many of them open by time of day. You're going to get what the bus travel routes are, which go through that area, how many bus arrivals are going through there. And then if I were to tick that bottom box as well, which actually I didn't do in this case here, you'd also get this traffic volume versus journey time, which we can support you with. Now, that's a really powerful way to look at when does the traffic actually break down in that location. So you're not just using volume alone, you've got that ability to look at volume combined with when congestion's occurring to really spot that difference. And it's really interesting because what you often see, like you can see on the picture here, probably a little bit small, but hopefully you can make that out. What you'll see is volume increases, and then you can actually get a drop in volume when that congestion really gets to the standstill point, which makes sense because there's less throughput which is occurring. That can sometimes be quite hard to tell for a team whether that's just a drop in volume, which then comes back a little bit later, or if that's that heavier congestion. So combining that with what's going on the road network gives you this kind of different level of visibility of that, and also really helps you understand when it gets to that point of failure. So what I'll do, that takes a couple of minutes to generate, so I'm just going to jump back into the slides for a second, go through the next couple of scenarios, and I'm going to go back to my email and show you the pack as it's come through, as well as start to have a look at some other components. Ari, I was trying to remember, actually, maybe just before we jump off, we even had someone mention, I think I was on the call with you the other day on this, about just capturing the number of houses which were captured within the disruption zone. Was that right?
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, that was a fascinating one. So we hadn't thought about this before, but the person we're talking to said, well, if you can capture the businesses, could you also capture the number of households? So the number of houses which are there, because they do flyer drops. So when they do the flyer drops, they were spending a bunch of time trying to manually figure out how many of these flyers they needed and how long it was going to take them to do that drop. So there's a whole heap of different pieces of information which we could bring into that, which would be super interesting. So we've talked quite a bit about taking better information and then feeding that into the process. So you've got more confidence about how you're thinking about where the work's going to occur and how you schedule around what's going on in the network, and that ability to measure if that's working or not and how you adjust that. I think such an important component when you're thinking about this space, which gets really, really interesting, is how do you deliver that operational intelligence to people on the day as they're working? So we know that it's going to be unpredictable and we know that there's going to be change. So how do we take that and then do something with that to deliver a really meaningful outcome? So the first thing which we've been working on at Mooven a lot is we know the traffic's going to be busy in the morning and the afternoon as a general rule. And we know quite a few, some of the specific areas which are going to be busy. So I'm in San Francisco, the Bay Bridge, which is the tail end, this is Oakland, the end of it. We know it's going to be busy in the morning and the afternoon. That's kind of logical. What's really, really hard to tell and really hard to tell in the moment quickly, though, is something occurring which is outside of that norm? So we just get lost in this noise of the normal kind of background congestion and other activity which is going on. So within Mooven, what you've got the ability to do is flick and have a look at the anomaly detection site. So have a look at all the sections of road which you're monitoring and try to spot something which is actually outside of the noise, outside of the norm. And so this is really, really powerful because, with AI, we can start to strip away a lot of this other variables about what's normal and really help to distill down that focus. So this example here, I grabbed it in just a screenshot because one of the annoying things with anomaly detection when it runs really well for us is clearly there's not always an issue going on the network. So it's not like we can just show busy traffic in the morning when it's busy, because it kind of hides all that from you. It really just spots the stuff which is unusual. But when you start talking about maintenance activity, this becomes a really, really powerful tool. So a couple of pragmatic ways which you could bring this in is at a toolbox check-in before you start the shift. You can just bring up not just the areas you're planning to work on, but the wider network, and immediately see if there's something which is unusual going on. Now, normally as a human, you'd look at the map and you see congestion, or you'd know what's kind of going on at that macro level, but it's so hard to tell if this Monday is different from the last 3 Mondays and it's now Tuesday and what's going on. So we see this as a really powerful way which teams can, on the day and also mid-shift, understand when something's going wrong or something's occurring on the network which they should respond to, regardless if it's caused by them or anyone else. Is just having that operational intelligence to go, we know something's going wrong in this case. We're getting really, really excited about, and Rob, our head of data science, has been doing some really interesting work for us, is going, okay, well, if we can spot these issues as they're emerging, can we also predict them? So this is something we get asked a lot. It's can you predict an issue when it's coming up? And so again, from a human perspective, if you had a person and there's a lot of traffic operations centers sitting there, you're looking at CCTV all the time, you can only look at so many cameras at one time. You're kind of manually processing this information. So as a human, it's really, really hard to take in all the variables across an entire area which could potentially impact traffic, or could impact the work which you're trying to do. But from our side, this is the perfect application of stuff like AI. So you can take this absolutely massive data, which can stream to you in real time, and in a whole heap of different kind of formats and granularities and levels of kind of accuracy. So, we often think about the stuff which is, controlled by teams. So, it might be a telematics site, that it's there, you've got like high granularity there. But it's really, really interesting to look at all this other stuff as well. So, incidents, is there planned events, is there holidays, is there other stuff which is going on nearby? And one of the problems often when you're trying to consider, 20, 30, 50, 100 different types of variables is not all of them are structured the same. Not all of them are as reliable as each other. Not all of them have a direct link to each other. So like, how do you understand all of those components? But then how do you make a decision on that in near real time? And so what Rob's been working on is taking all of these inputs and then trying to take this down to something which is really simple and applicable for our customers. And so the example here is looking at an hour ahead prediction. So there's all sorts of crazy stuff you could do, but a really high impact piece which we keep seeing is if you have a crew on the road doing, say, litter collection or striping or something similar, if we can see that there's an emerging issue occurring, and this might be on the roads kind of nearby or much, much further afield, if we could give that team effectively a heads up, like let them know that something's emerging, they can immediately look at it. They can immediately make a decision about, do we pack up quicker? Do we move on? Do we do something around it? And the beauty within the maintenance space in particular is that it's much, much easier for you to do that. So in some of the really big jobs, you can't react quite so quickly, but for the maintenance activity, you can. And so what we've found, what this visual shows down here, is that this was a particular area of the network which we're looking at and implementing this on. The blue line was the actual travel times and the actual journey times which occurred on the network. And then what you're seeing is the orange line is the prediction which we had. So obviously the prediction came an hour ahead of time. So we've now mapped them so you can see the two of them kind of nicely together. But we've been really, really happy with the types of results which we can get, where we can very consistently pick up the spike which is potentially coming up. So we can see here the orange line came and picked up the morning spike, what came up, and also picked up the spike which occurred on this other example here, but also picked the different magnitudes, right? So these are both occurring like kind of 6 a.m. timeframe. So it's not just this kind of slightly dumb model, which is like, it's the morning, it's going to be heavier traffic. It's really understanding that magnitude of impact based on a whole range of other inputs into it. And so we see this as a really compelling way which you could drive a very, very different change on how teams operate on a live network using some like amazingly cool advanced technology, but into a really, really simple application. So kind of as the segue for that, I think sometimes it's really tempting to get carried away into like, the advanced ways you can visualize things and some of these kind of advanced screens. But, one thing we've been like super fixated on at Mooven is going like, if we don't have someone change the behavior that day or that week on the ground and they don't get a better result, we really haven't done our job. Like our job's not to feed data to someone. Our job is to help them with an operational decision and help them to do that quick enough that they can actually impart a result onto that. So that often then comes down to going like, how do you reach your customers or the users in a way which makes sense for them? And so just keeping that really, really simple. So like high impact channels like SMS notifications. So I just took a couple of screenshots off my phone this morning. So just really, really simple things, but things which can cut through and to help give people that context straight away. So we have quite a few people who, from our side, we're actually just kind of surprised, set these things up so they're a little bit more kind of chatty than we would have initially expected. But it really helps the person on the other side of it understand as the situation's emerging and then as the situation's de-escalating. So it gives you this like really nice, crisp view of like, as soon as something's occurring, I get visibility, I can do something about it, and then I can see how that responds. So one of the things with this as well, what we've been doing quite a lot more work on, is this ability to put comments and to collaborate in real time. So as soon as something's emerging, the ability to be able to tag into the system, okay, we've had an issue which is occurring, kind of what's happening and how do I send a notification out. And so on the right-hand picture here, this is just an example which we've got, where we've got an install of some barriers which are starting to cause an issue, and then the team's been able to come through and actually timestamp what's going on, when they've identified the issue and how they've started responding. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flick to my email quickly. So in this example, it comes through, you have this visibility, so you can get that sent to you as an email as well, but then you can click into that and you can dive straight to that particular project and have a look at what's going on in that particular location. So that takes you straight to the job which is going on. You've got the kind of incident log there, which you can come and you can keep updating. You can send those updates on, but you can just click on that and then you can immediately see what's going on, where that was, and that other context around it. Now, apologies, guys. That would help if I would have shared my other screen, so you would have seen that pop up. So what I was just showing to you before was when you clicked on that, that took you straight to the particular project which is having the issue. You can immediately see the annotation there, the comment which is there. If you click on that, that takes you down and it filters that data exactly on what you're looking at. So it's a really easy way for you to be able to share that with any number of people very, very quickly and enable better collaboration with that. So the last thing I was just going to come back to was having a look at that disruption pack. So as you saw before, what I did is I had a question. I was going to say, hey, look, we're going to work on this intersection. We want to work in I think it was the second week of January. What does that look like? So a process which has normally taken teams a lot of time and you wouldn't be able to do easily. We've just been able to create this. That got sent through to me straight away as an email. So it's got all the description about what's going on there. And what you get with that is a document which shows you, if I bring this up, shows you all of the businesses which are within that associated area. So it gives you a really clear idea of exactly how many of them are there and where they are. You get a summary of how many businesses are open by time of day. So time of day running this way from midnight to midnight, and then by days of the week. So you can really quickly make an assessment of, okay, we were planning to come on at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. at night or whatever it might be. We can have a view of like how busy that is, as well as then having a look at the public transport routes which are impacted by this. So this has picked up all of the bus stops which sit within that area. You can see where those bus routes come from. And then again, you can start to have a look at what is the number of bus arrivals which are occurring per hour by day of the week. So it just helps you to have so much more context in how you're thinking about planning and positioning that. Now with this as well, it's not just the kind of summary of the data, but you get the full detail which sits underneath that. So you get that full list of every single business which got captured in that area and the associated opening times, their website and contact details. So it's just a really powerful resource. In the paving maintenance space, you're probably less likely to go into the full detail of this, but you may still have a couple of high-profile businesses which you might want to get in contact with or understand a little bit closer, like what the impact of the work may be. So it's just this idea where you can go from, a view of where you want to work and what you want to be able to do, to execution, getting data and like actionable insight within 10 minutes and be able to inform what you're doing. Cool. Now, I am aware that we have run over time slightly on that one there. I was trying to probably put a little bit much into this webinar. There's, you could actually break it out and spend quite a bit of time on paving and maintenance in their own right. But I think the general concept works really, really well across both of them. And there's clearly going to be some new nuances between them, but the general principle of like applying this kind of rich local context to inform your planning and then how you work in a live environment is totally uniform between the two of them. Ari, do we just want to break it there, or have you got anything which is worth just posing from the chat as a question?
I'm not seeing anything from the chat yet, so we can give that another 30 seconds or so and then hop off there.
Cool, perfect. I do really like that idea of capturing the kind of number of households in there. It really made me think, because rather than just doing the kind of manual flyer drop as well, the leaflet drop, I was kind of thinking, well, why couldn't we grab all of those addresses and then just create that into a file, which you could really easily do a mail merge and just go, okay, I now know all the people who are in this area. I've grabbed all the houses, all the addresses, kind of hit send, and it digitally just pushes it out, and then you get that stuff being just posted directly out to them. So there's some really cool ideas, I think, which you could do there about bringing additional context in.
Yeah, and I think, on the other side, people just want to be aware that you're thinking about them, right? And community engagement, something we keep hearing over and over again, whether it's fire department, emergency personnel, hospitals, whatever it may be. At the end of the day, people want to know that you took them into consideration. This just helps them take that extra step there.
Yeah, totally. I think it's such an interesting one, because if you can show that you've thought about it and you've considered it, it's often just like such a big part of it, because like there's clearly concern. But as soon as people realize that you've gone through the effort to consider it and thought about it, and you can kind of talk to that well, like it does make it much, much easier to be able to cut through and do what you need to do.
Definitely. Well, I'm not seeing any more things pop up in the chat here, so I think we're good to call it there.
Cool, perfect. Hi, Peter. I saw a little comment from Peter. I know Peter, so hope you're well. We'll have to touch base soon. Okay, see you, everyone.